Hey everybody, welcome to Get Centered. And this month we're talking about Renaissance, rebirth, springtime, which is the transition from one state into another. I'm also going to be talking about symbols of Renaissance and rebirth. And there have been many, many symbols of transformation in history. And one of the most ancient symbols of the dynamic nature of transformation is the Ouroboros, which is Greek for tail eater, or the snake or dragon eating its own tail. One of the first symbols that we find is all the way back in ancient Egypt. And you'll see the Ouroboros, the snake, circling the pharaoh, and then the Ouroboros in medieval alchemy. So already we're jumping about 3,000 years, and essentially the symbol has remained the same. And then one of the fascinating things about being a Jungian, seeing how these symbols continuously reemerge and reappear in different ways, I'd like to propose that we also have more modern interpretations, whether conscious or unconscious, of the Ouroboros symbol. One being the famous M.C. Escher, the two hands drawing themselves. And then also one of my favorite films, Arrival, if you've seen it, and the language of the aliens takes the form that is very reminiscent of an Ouroboros for me. So transformation. The idea of transformation is actually quite simple. It's that something must die or change in order that something new can emerge. And generally that's why people come to analysis or psychotherapy, that there's something within themselves, in their situation, in their relationships that they want to change. Now, when we're talking about springtime and look at the cycles of nature, in nature, transformation happens organically, but psychologically and emotionally, we tend to hold on to what is familiar and what is known and safe. And even though we want transformation, we tend to block it in many conscious and unconscious ways. Here's a quote by Jungian analyst James Hollis from his book, Living an Examined Life. We have been defined by our history, our attachments, our provisional definitions of ourselves and others, and we cling to our history with a tenacity precisely because to think of ourselves in other ways is either intimidating or unimaginable. But the human psyche imagines more. So how does this imagining more take place? There must be a bridge to connect the two transformative states, the old with the new, the unconscious with the conscious. And Jung says that psychologically symbols form these bridges, and that if we work with these symbols consciously, they can help us transform from one state to another. So literally, when Hollis says the human psyche imagines more, the human psyche imagines in symbols. So here is a quote from Jung. The further development of the individual can be brought about only by means of symbols, which represent something far in advance of one's current state and whose intellectual meanings cannot yet be grasped entirely. So the concept of the symbol is that it connects the known with the unknown, the conscious with the unconscious, as well as past experience with future possibility. And when we look around culturally, religiously, politically, there are many ways that we use symbols all the time, and symbols as bridges, and some quite consciously. One of the most common, I would say, is the wedding ring. My wedding ring happens to have a dragon on it, which will come up a little bit later. But so as we consciously use that symbol, we are connecting a known past to an unknown future. There are other ways that symbols come to us that we do not use as consciously, in dreams, in spirituality, in nature. Sometimes we work with symbols in creative projects, art, or we're attracted to them in literature, culture, politics, films. But for part of this talk, I'd like to talk about one very specific way that a lot of people in our culture, both consciously and consciously, work with symbols that are important to them, and that is to get a tattoo that symbolizes something for them moving into a new phase of life. So for me, the dragon had been a very important symbol. I don't have time to really go into it, but from a meditation experience when I was about 20, I didn't speak to anyone about it for about 15 years. Then in my late 30s, I entered Jungian analysis, worked through a lot of things on my own. And then when I was about 45, and here we go, I decided, even though I was a good Baptist boy from Lubbock and wasn't the kind of guy to get a tattoo, I thought, well, I'm 45, I can get a tattoo. So I decided to get, this is a dragon in the form of an Ouroboros. You'll see the dragon connecting to itself. This is back in 2012. And what I didn't anticipate were the psychological effects of getting the tattoo. I felt myself standing up a little straighter. I could feel the tattoo on my chest. I felt like some of that energy that was unconscious that I'd been carrying with me for so many years was actually a part of my life now, that I'd actually taken steps to bring it into my life. And it had actually profound psychological effects on me. And I started to get curious about other people and their relationship to tattoos. So I began working with my good friend and wonderful Jungian analyst in Houston, Kate Burns. We began interviewing people, and I was doing photos, and we did several seminars at the Jung Center. And I would like to just show you some photos and some stories from three of the people that we talked to and how they incorporated tattoos, both consciously and unconsciously, into transitions in their lives. So this is a friend who's living in China, getting his master's degree in international studies. Here he is, and with the dragon tattoo that he got when he was in China. He was in a really difficult time in his life. And if you'll notice in the tattoo, there's kind of an unusual color pattern. So a very traditional Chinese dragon that he got in China, but the color pattern, he overlaid the Colorado flag, the color scheme of the Colorado flag onto his dragon, and had the tattoo artist do it in that form. Because coming from Colorado, the nature, so many things that were very, very important to him growing up, those connections, he wanted to somehow fuse with his current experience to carry with him. And then this is a direct quote from an interview that we did with him at the time that we did this project, sort of describing this period of time. My name was on some government blacklist for a visa. I'd left my job. My thesis advisor had passed away. I had no direction and no idea of what to do, but I had this guy, and he pointed to his tattoo, his dragon tattoo, and I said to myself, think about what you've already accomplished. Think about all the people that are in this world that care about you. Take a deep breath. Think of the action and the right course, and take that first step toward making things better, and you'll get there. Nobody can take that away from you. So he had it on him as a powerful force, which really aligned with my experience very much. The next example, this is Elliot, and the first slide is of Elliot's finished tattoo. These are photos taken in 2016. A very dramatic and remarkable looking red-haired woman surrounded by a lot of really beautiful, mysterious imagery, but also imagery of transformation, animals, both alive and dead. And now here are the pictures that we did. So the tattoo, when we first talked to Elliot, was unfinished in 2014. And here are side-by-side slides of Elliot in 2014 and 2016 with the finished tattoo. So Elliot, when he began the tattoo, was only vaguely aware of his gender journey and his identification as a trans man. And then eventually, in 2016, this is after his transformation and his gender identity. And it's so interesting to see and think about the possible unconscious yearnings and meanings of the tattoo in the process of that journey. And the final example I would like to give is of a wonderful friend and musician, Trisha Fox. And this first image, she said when she was quite young, she didn't really know the place that music would hold in her life. But when she was very young, she would draw with a Sharpie on her wrist. At that point, it was a heart bisected by a treble clef. And then when her father wasn't too happy about it, but she decided pretty young to go ahead and get the tattoo of the outline of a guitar and the treble clef as a reminder of what was inside her and that she couldn't really give up on that part of herself and those expressions. Another tattoo of hers in the next slide. She grew up, she has a Scottish family, but her father was in the oil business, grew up all over the world, spent a lot of time as a child in Dubai. And so the concept of home was very complicated for her. And for her Scottish family, she felt the phrase within the family was tea with milk. So tea with milk essentially meant home for her. And so she decided, because of her experiences in Dubai, and she thought the Arabic language was both incredibly beautiful as script and an incredibly beautiful language in general. So she got the tattoo on her foot, as you can see, in Arabic, meaning tea with milk, the kind of the concept of taking home with her wherever she went. And now she's married to a great guy, Dave Ransom, also a beautiful singer-songwriter, has a couple of wonderful kids. And right about now, so this Mother's Day in 2021, here's the next slide, she's releasing her album called The Gathering. And to bring together the ideas of these two tattoos, family and music, she experienced a lot of difficulty with postpartum depression, loneliness. She said the things that mothers don't tend to talk about. And she started this as a project of her own, working through a lot of the difficult things of motherhood, what that means for a young couple, having kids, and the things that she also has a degree in psychology, and said, it's so important to have these conversations. And for her, her and her husband to have these conversations through music seemed like the most natural way. So we'll have a link in the notes. So look out for her album, The Gathering. So just 3, and including mine, 4 stories of inner experience and how tattoos facilitated transformations. And I'd like to end with another Jungian quote. A symbol is the sensuously perceptible expression of an inner experience. It must be expressed one way or another, for therein is revealed its eminent vital force. It wants to step over into visible life, to take concrete shape. And so as I open this up for conversation with my colleagues, there's the idea, I wanted to make sure that this didn't just apply to people who get tattoos, because some people do find this very meaningful. But the idea is that everyone can be more conscious of symbols, whether this is through dreams, through whatever their religious affiliations are, but to be more conscious about the ways that we express these and the ways that we integrate these into our lives in concrete ways. That just to think about them as one thing. I'd say for someone in the Christian tradition for whom communion is very important, the idea of taking communion is one thing, but actually going through the process is extremely vital to that. So yeah, to open up the conversation and talk about ways for all of us to incorporate working with symbols in a more conscious way in our lives.
Thanks, Rodney. I always love when you do the tattoo presentation. I'm curious about something you said regarding, you've said it before, that I think tattoos are kind of unique because they're on our bodies. And the way that you've said it, I really enjoy, is that we think we're getting a tattoo, but what we realize is that it is interrogating us. Mm-hmm. Will you speak about that for a moment?
Yeah, just that, it's something that then once is a part of our body, it's something that we are confronted with either on a conscious or unconscious level every day. It is a decision to interact with that. And so for many people that we interviewed, the interrogation is about, people would say, well, I hate that tattoo, I wouldn't get it again. So the question is, well, but why and when did you get the tattoo? Does it represent a shift in your life in some other way? And most people said, yeah, but I wouldn't remove it because I wouldn't be who I am now if I wasn't who I was then, and that represents who I was then. So to have that sort of map that we're confronted with on my body, a reminder of my own journey. And for women, often we interviewed several women, victims of survivors of violent, sometimes sexual abuse. The idea of ownership of one's body was often very important as well. That to be able to say, I can take ownership of my body and express in the way that is extremely important for me. That also for trans people, not just Elliot, I talked to other trans men, trans women, for whom the idea of expression, one trans man who, the idea of dead naming is, to use the name that someone no longer goes by. But he decided to have a tattoo of his former name as a reminder. He said that is part of my journey, part of my identity. And though I don't want anyone else using it, it's a reminder for me.
I'm thinking about this through the lens of Jewish practice, and I know that there's at least a strong stigma against tattoos generally within the Jewish tradition, and I think there's a lot of reasons that people give about why, and there's also a lot of misnomers about what happens if you do get a tattoo. I think one of the ways that people have tried to dissuade a young Jewish kid from getting theirs, they say, well, you wouldn't be buried in the Jewish cemetery. Right? I'm sure you heard this.
I've had somebody tell me that once, yes.
Yeah, and it's like, wait a second, and then, because we're thinking people were just like, yeah, but what about all of those people who Hitler lined up, and not to get too, sour, but it's like he lined them up and put tattoos all over all of them, every one of them got one right here,
Mm-hmm.
And so just like you're telling me they didn't get buried in the Jewish cemetery, I'd stop, right? Please. So then the question is, what's the intent, right? What's the intent behind it? And I don't really, I'll be honest, now hearing you today, I'm thinking to myself, it sounds pretty powerful. I mean, as a possibility for people to heal. I mean, maybe there's some parameters around it, but it seems like such a opportunity. There's obviously another side to think about, but I'm curious what that brings up. Yeah, I don't know if you heard about that in your process of interviewing people. This is against my, morals.
Well, I mean, there's one person who participated whose mother was in the audience, and she said, well, can't you just paint something and put it on the wall? Why does it have to be a part of your body? And that was the ownership of the body thing. That this is an important step of my ownership process. But on the other side, that's why I want this to be the talk of symbolism and symbols and how we use them to be also broader than the idea of getting tattoos. And how do we work with these more consciously? If something comes up in a dream, or if there's something we really respond to, either positive or negatively, from a book or a film, or something really touches or moves us, to think about what that means for us, and how that represents an undeveloped part of our psyche that wants to be explored further.
Rodney, you talked about the symbolic mindset at the end of your presentation in terms of transition. What do you say to the person who might tell you, oh, I just don't think that way. I don't think symbolically. What do you say to that person?
That's a really good question, because of course that's a conscious thought. So there are symbols that person would respond to. They might have really strong feelings about after George Floyd's murder, all the conversations around the Confederate flag and Confederate imagery. That person, it's something that's relevant in culture. They might have very strong feelings about symbols and not think of it as a personal association. So I would try to find ways in the culture or religiously or whatever that they probably have a symbol would bring up for them very, very strong feelings, and interrogate, well, where is that coming from? What does that mean? It's just a symbol. It's just a it's just a drawing on paper. It's just this. Why is it bringing up this much emotion for you? And that as an exploration of, well, there is power in there somewhere. So where is that coming from? And why do you respond to it personally? How would you approach that situation?
I think that's right. I think it's, some of it's a semantic argument. It's like, oh, I don't think symbolically, but as you said, it's like, well, you know, some things stir up some feelings in you.
Mhm.
And, you know, you may not have labeled that as a symbol for you, but it is, you know, whatever it is that is bringing up these feelings for you is pointing you to something beyond you. You know,
Mhm.
that's, you know, the difference between a sign and a symbol. You know,
Right.
a symbol points beyond, and the sign points to, you know, something too.
Mhm.
And so I think you're right in the exploration of feelings that don't necessarily have a rational connection to something.
Mhm.
Well, and even things that don't have a charged emotion around them, like a stop sign is a symbol. You know, these people who are saying that they don't relate to symbols constantly. They're just not minded that way, and or maybe they have a resistance or a reluctance to step into that mystery zone of life, which we keep discovering seems to be even greater than what we do know, right? So maybe they're just scared.
Mhm. Mhm. Well, again, like the Hollis quote, something intimidating or something unimaginable. So it's also an aspect of imagination. What else can we imagine to be possible for ourselves?
Mhm, mhm. Yeah. And I had a thought earlier I wanted to share just about somebody who doesn't yet have a tattoo, as somebody who doesn't yet have a tattoo, the transformation journey I've been through, um, in terms of the acceptance of the other, you know, whether we were taught ourselves not to have them, or furthermore, those that do have them are bad or scary or what have you, you know, and you know, obviously that's just not true. And so it's been such a magnificent journey of my own, to expand my mind and my understanding that these symbols that can live on a human's body can be so deeply meaningful and transformative. So yeah, maybe one day I'll end up with one.
That's what I cued in on. I mean, you did say yet, so
Yeah.
I'm holding out hope that that we'll go get a tattoo together. All right, Rodney, you want to close this out?
Sure. I would just say for everyone, the tattooed, the untattooed, the questioning, uh, to be curious. Again, so often what I say to all my clients, we've got to replace judgment with curiosity. And wherever we find a judgment or a good or bad about something, especially something internal, about why we're responding to something, just get curious, get very curious about it, explore it, and see where it leads you.